Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations. I'm very excited today, as you can probably tell by my voice, because I've got something quite exciting to share with you. So if you're one of my subscribers, firstly, thank you for subscribing. You will have probably seen that recently I've been really interested in plaster casting and seeing how I can merge the art of plaster casting with the art of resin. And so I had a go at making an ocean scene, and I made some coasters. And today I've decided to have a go at making a base for a geode slice. And so that's what this video is all about today. And you will learn how easy it is to make something quite amazing. So if I've whetted your arty appetite, sit back, get yourself a cup of coffee or a cup of tea or a glass of wine and enjoy the video. Please remember to subscribe so you get notifications for my next videos. Right, so your first job's going to be to roll out your modelling clay. Any modelling clay will do. I'll put a link to the one I use in the description. Now, I've used those two red rolling guides to make sure it's an even thickness all the way through. Whatever thickness you decide to roll your clay, that's going to be the depth of the inside of your geode. So however thick this piece of clay is however thick your layer of resin will be when you fill your geode with resin. So if you're trying to be economical with your resin and you don't want too much, do it nice and thinly. If you want a few layers like I'm going to be doing, you need to make it a little bit thicker basically. So once it's rolled out, you can, whatever shape you've rolled it into, tends to be, well, the way I do it is whichever shape it's rolled out into is the kind of guideline for what shape my geode will be. I kind of just went with the shape it came out as and just cut it out with my craft knife. Then you're going to need to cut out the hole in the middle, and before I do that, what I use is a stylus tool, you know, the little ball stylus tools, just to make a light mark to check that I'm happy with the shape that I'm making the hole before I cut it out. And that piece that I've cut out is quite an important piece. I'm going to be using that again in a minute, so I'll keep that safe and tell you about that soon. First of all, what I need to do, you can just see here, I'm smoothing down the inner edges. I want like a sloping edge, not a vertical edge. And on that sloping edge, I'm going to make a texture. And that will make a really nice textured effect on the inside of the geode on the finished piece, which you'll see a little bit later on. So I'm not using any special tools, just my fingers with, well, yeah, I suppose they are special tools, the best ones really. I'm just using my fingers to smooth it down, and don't worry about any little indentations you get on the surface of this clay, because at the end of the day, this surface will be the what will make the surface of the plaster geode, and that's all going to be covered in resin. So it really doesn't matter if there's any little imperfections or any little bits of plaster left in the clay from the last time you used it, which I've got here. If you look closely, you can see lots of little specks of white, and that's from the last time I used it for a similar project. So yeah, it doesn't really matter. Don't worry too much about getting it super smooth. And what you can see me doing now is just using a stone from the garden. I'm digging it in all around that sloping edge to make a lovely texture, which doesn't look all that impressive now, but once you've got the plaster relief from this clay, you'll see what a great effect you get from it. Right then, it's time for the centre of the geode, and this is where it gets really interesting because it's how we form the part where the crystals are going to be anchored in to the geode. And it took me quite a while to design this in my head and to work out how it would work. But once I worked it out, it does work. It really does work effectively. So what I've got is the middle that are cut out before, but I've rolled out another piece exactly the same thickness, and I've stuck them both together. Just no slip or anything was required. I just put them together. The clay was wet enough, and trimmed round it again so that we had a double height central piece, just the same as it was before, just double the height. And then what I did was I trimmed off 1 centimetre all around the edge so that when it fits back in the middle of the geode, there will be a gap all around the edge. Right, before I tell you about the next step for the centre of the geode, I just wanted to show you the surface I'm going to be working on. And all it is an MDF board, which I had, and I've covered it in Fablon, you know, what you can use for things like kitchen cupboard doors and things like that. And it's like an adhesive plastic, but it's not permanent. It can pull off again, which is really handy, and you'll see why a little bit later on. So this forms a really nice surface for me to pour my plaster onto and get that really lovely edge to my finished piece. Okay, back to the middle piece again. What I have here is some crystals which I've made in, just little crystal moulds, using leftover bits of resin when I've been doing other projects. Whenever I've got anything left over, I just pour it into a little silicone mould, all different shapes and sizes of stone moulds and crystal moulds, and I save them for a day such as this one where I need them. And what I'm going to be doing is sticking them into the sides of that piece of clay. Now, as you will discover, the more you watch this video, you'll understand that everything is kind of back to front. The top is the bottom and the bottom is the top. So what I'm doing is, because I want, in my finished geode, I want my smallest crystals at the uppermost surface, and I want the long crystals to be showing from the bottom of the hole in the middle. If that makes sense, I hope it does. So what I've got to do is do it the other way around. I'm putting the long crystals at the top, and I'm sticking the small crystals at the bottom. And what you've got to do is leave some of the crystals sticking out, because that's the plaster will pour over it and the crystals will lock into the plaster. Okay, I hope you can understand that. You will understand it as you watch it. So yeah, what you're sticking into the clay is the bit that you're going to see in your finished geode. So if your crystal's got one nice end and one scruffy end, make sure the nice end is the end that you stick into the clay and leave the scruffy end sticking out. Okay, so all my crystals are in, and now it's time to put that central piece back into the centre. And now you can see why I needed to trim off 1 centimetre all around the edge of my central piece. We needed that space for the plaster to be poured into, and we're going to be pouring the plaster in very shortly, so I'm getting it all prepared and making sure it's all in position. Now, before I can pour the plaster in, obviously I need to make sure we've got a barrier around the edge to stop the plaster escaping. And what I'm using for the barrier is tin foil, and I like to use the tin foil because when you scrunch it up, it gives you a really fantastic texture, which is just like the surface of a geode, the outside of the geode. So I'm using that, and I'm scrunching it all up really long. I didn't actually quite make it long enough, but it doesn't matter. You can piece it all together if you don't make it quite long enough. And I'm flattening it out, because if your texture is too lumpy and bumpy, you'll struggle to take it off afterwards. It'll get too stuck into the plaster. So I'm kind of squeezing it and flattening it down before I put it into position. I'm going to use leftover bits of clay to hold that barrier into place just around the edge of the outside, and it's really good to use clay for this because it stops any plaster leaking out. If you were to use hot glue from a hot glue gun, that's really good in a way, but you can't always see if you've missed a bit. But if you use clay, you know you've got it completely sealed because you can see it. You can see it clearly. So I do like to use clay for this. Okay, the next thing I did was I poured the plaster in. I seem to have lost the footage, but it was quite, straightforward really. You can use your imagination. It's stone cast plaster. I mixed it according to the instructions and poured it into the height of that middle piece and then stopped. That's the guide for how much to put in. Just stop when you get to the top of that middle piece and then give it a good shake about to get rid of any air bubbles, and that's it. And it will be ready after half an hour. It's that simple. What I did do before I left it was I made 2 hooks to put in the back, and I used garden wire, and I just bent them with some pliers and very gently placed them in. And you do need to be gentle. Don't press it into the clay underneath, because otherwise when you demold it you're going to have the hooks poking through the front of your geode, and you don't want that. So just rest them gently in the plaster. Right, after half an hour it's ready. Just if you're not confident whether it is ready or not, feel it. And it'll still be warm because it heats up as it's curing. It will be warm, but it'll be firm, and you'll know it. You can just tell. So yeah, I'm pulling off the tin foil. And the reason I'm doing it straight away, instead of leaving it for a few hours just to make sure, is because I need to get to that clay and get it put away in a sealed container so I can use it again, because it's air drying clay that I've used. I couldn't get hold of any of the regular clay that potters use that needs to go in a kiln. That would have been great because it doesn't air dry like this clay does. So yeah, I wanted to get it put away and stored in an airtight container as soon as I possibly could so I could use it again, because I don't like to waste things. And yeah, I'm just pulling off the tin foil, pulling off those spare little bits around the edges. I didn't keep those. They did dry out, but the bit underneath I'll be able to keep. Right, it's time to turn it over and have a look. And what I'm doing here is I'm just pulling up that Fablon off the board. I mentioned it before that it's good because it doesn't stick permanently. I just pulled it up and it just released it really quickly once I just broke the suction that was keeping it down. It was just a bit tricky to get off until I did that, and then it just popped off. Right, and now I'm just using a lolly stick and taking out that clay, which can be used again if you want to set it all up and start all over again and do another one. You could do it straight away and do another one, or you could store it in a plastic bag until next time. And here I'm just doing a cross in the middle of that central part and pulling out the clay from around the crystals. You do need to be careful because you can knock the crystals out if you're not careful, and that doesn't really matter because you can glue them in again later if any of them come out. Don't worry about that. But what I am doing is I'm using my heat gun to dry out the clay a bit, because it is easier to take off the clay from around those crystals if it's a little bit drier. To be honest, it's probably the most tedious part of the whole job is taking that clay off from the middle, and you probably will end up with a cocktail stick poking at the clay around the crystals just to get it off. But once it's off, it's worth all that messing about to get the clay off, because it looks so good. It really does. And isn't it great just to have all your geode there in one piece, and you don't have to worry about how to stick in the crystals and making them stay while you're using your resin and whatnot. It's just there permanently, and it's great. So here I've just laid it on top of a bowl of water, and I'm just brushing away with a toothbrush to get any leftover little bits of clay from around those crystals. And you can also do that around the top of your geode as well. If there's any residue from the clay on there, just give it a little brush. You can even go and rinse it under the shower if you want to. Just be careful not to get it down your plug hole, because then you'll be in trouble. Right, it's a week later, and if you take a look at it, you can see that texture that I was making early on in the clay with the stone around that edge, and you can see clearly now why I was saying that everything's upside down, because all those crystals, the long crystals, are now at the bottom and they were at the top before. So yeah, hopefully it's all making sense to you now. And anyway, what I'm just doing now is just brushing it all over with some polyurethane varnish just to seal it, because plaster of Paris really is very porous, and if you don't seal it first, you find that when you paint it, it kind of can, it doesn't work very well with the paint. It's hard to explain it, but I would definitely recommend sealing it first. And also, even if you're not painting it, still seal it with at least one layer, but 2 or 3 layers would be great, because if you're putting resin straight onto the plaster, you'll get all any moisture that's left in that plaster will come up into the resin, and you'll have problems with that as well. So yeah. So you can, whether you're going to paint it or not paint it, seal it anyway. Okay? Oh, I'm bossy. I'm so bossy. You know, sometimes it's so easy when I listen back to myself on these videos. It's so easy to see that I spent many, many, many years teaching children in a primary school. So yeah, I do apologise if sometimes I speak to you like you're 7 years old. I don't mean to. It's just, I think it's in my blood now. So I decided to go for a dark brown base coat because the inside of that texture, I wanted inside all of those cracks to be dark brown. So there's texture there in the middle and there's texture around the outside. So I thought, well, what the heck, why don't I just paint it all dark brown? And then it's got a nice base to seal that plaster. So that's what I did. The more you can get on there, the more layers of paint or varnish, the better it will be when you come to put your resin in, because no moisture from that plaster will get through it. So it'll be great. Okay, so I gave that brown paint a chance to dry thoroughly, and now I'm going to put my colour on there. I'm using black, then blue, then gold in the middle. I wanted that gradual change from dark to light towards the middle. So once that had dried, I put a little bit more gold on, just so that I could make that middle bit a little bit brighter, and also I needed to just finish off the edges with gold too. And the other thing that you didn't see me do because of the angle of the geode is I paint the edges of the geode with the gold on the brush, but not too much. It's kind of almost like dry brushing. and it just brushes the surface of that texture on the outside and keeps the dark cracks, and then you get that much more 3D effect if you do it that way. So yeah, that was what I did. Oh, I do waffle sometimes. Okay, it's time for the resin, and what I've done is I've mixed 200 millilitres of total cast resin, which I put in a heat bath first. Just because it's so cold here at the moment, as you can tell, because you can probably see I've got my dressing gown on most of this video, just because I'm so cold. Anyway, yeah, I put it in a heat bath because if it's too cold, you get a funny effect on the surface of your resin when it's cured, and we don't want that. So yeah, I did it in a heat bath, and I've made 2 different shades of blue there, and I can't for the life of me remember which colours, but I will put the colours, the pigments that I've used, in the description box below. I just haven't got them near me at the moment. I can't remember which ones they were. Anyway, I've drizzled them round the edge on top of each other. I'm not using too much colour in this. I want that base to show through. So I've just done that much blue. I'm using some gold, and then the rest of it is going to be clear. And I'm going to be doing at least 2 layers on this geode. So this is just the base layer. I like to work in layers because if something just doesn't work out how I want it to, then I've got a chance to do something else on the next layer. It's my insurance policy. That's why I like to work in layers. If you fill it up all in one go and then you don't like it, well, then you're stuck. Now I'm just using a few strips of UPO paper to swipe the gold across the resin. I haven't zoomed in too much to show you the details because in the end the effect was so subtle that it would have been hard to see on camera. But it does actually, in real life, you can see the effect that had. You don't have to use UPO paper. You can use grease-proof paper. You could use acetate. You could try out all different things to swipe the paint along, and you get kind of a lacing effect. Sometimes you get nice cells coming through, and hopefully you'll be able to see that in the close-up that I do at the end. And before I left it secure, I gave it a quick burst of heat from my kitchen torch all over a few times. What I do is I do it very quickly and leave it, and then wait for some more bubbles to appear and do it very quickly again, because if you overheat it, you're going to burn your resin, and you don't want to burn your resin because it leaves a really horrible finish. Right, so that's how it looks after the first layer, and I'm really pleased with it actually, but it still needs something else in my opinion, so get ready for the second layer. Right, so it's time to plan what I want to do on the second layer, and I actually did like it how it was, but in a way I felt it was a little bit lacking somewhere. I wanted something extra, and it looks quite severe what I'm doing now with this big thick black line. But don't panic, there was a reason for it. To be honest, I don't normally like to see lines drawn on geodes. It's just personal preference. There's just something about it that I don't like. But this line is going to be covered up. It's more of a guideline, and it will also just form a little bit of a shadow effect on what I'm going to do next, which is to add some shell pieces. It's the abalone or abalone, I don't know how you say it. Those lovely shiny shells. I think they're designed for nail art, and I can't give you a link to them, unfortunately. I got them off Wish, and yeah, they come from China, and at the moment things coming from China are stuck in customs. So yeah, I won't bother giving you a link to that. But if you just do a search for abalone shell slices, that's what it is. And yeah, I think they use them a lot on nails. So what I'm doing is I'm using PVA glue to go along the line and stick on the little pieces of shell for a really unusual effect. And I really do love it. I think it just turned out so pretty and different. And you will see that it was a bit of a faffing around to get them all into position, because I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, I think, and I wanted it to be just right. You don't need to do it like that if you don't want to. You could just sprinkle them onto your glue like you would with glitter, but I wanted to kind of arrange them a little bit more carefully, and it's actually really enjoyable to just sit there and put everything into position, and I find it quite relaxing. It's all part of the art. So yeah, that's what I did very carefully, and it did take about half an hour to get them all on, but I was really pleased with the end result. And here we are. This is how it looked when I'd gone all the way around. I think it's so pretty. Really am pleased with those little pieces of shell. Just every time you look at it, you see a little detail in the shell that you've never noticed before, and it adds interest, but it's not in your face. It's delicate and elegant, and I just really love it. Right, now I'm just giving it another coat of clear resin, and what I am going to do in that middle section is pour in some acrylic diamonds, and they did sink a bit. The effect is quite subtle. It wasn't really what I was going for, but I still quite like it. It kind of ended up looking like, it sounds funny, but you know when you see frog spawn in the pond, it's got that kind of frog spawn effect, and I actually did like that. But what I think I'll do, I haven't at the time of narrating, I haven't actually done the last little bit, but what I think I will do is when this is cured, I'm going to put a few more crystals on the top before I do the final thin coat of resin, just to get a little bit of sparkly, glittery effects back again instead of just frog spawn. And here we have it, the end result. All you missed me do was one last thin layer of clear resin, just because it wasn't quite reaching the edges, right at the top of the edges in places, and I just wanted it to be completely flush to the edges all the way around. So I did do one last little bit. Anyway, this is how it's turned out, and I'm really happy with it. I love those bits of shell. I love the subtle effect of not putting too much colour in and having that painted base. I think that's turned out really delicate, and I do like delicate. Yeah, I'm really pleased with it. If you found my video useful, as always, I'd like to request that you hit subscribe and please give my video the thumbs up. It really does help the channel with all the algorithms behind the scenes if it's got lots of thumbs up. And please leave me a comment if you've got any questions or anything you'd like to say about the video. The feedback is so helpful to me, and it really helps me to know which kind of videos are popular and which ones to avoid doing. So yeah, thank you for your feedback. It really is appreciated.